We are speaking to Professor Anselm J. Hennis, the Director of the Chronic Disease Research Center at UWI Cave Hill, Barbados. Professor Hennis is the Anthony N. Sabga Caribbean Awards for Excellence Laureate in Science and Technology for 2013. Good day, Dr. Hennis.
Good day to you, Dr. Ramcharitar.
Tell us a little bit about what the CDRC does.
Fine. We are the Chronic Disease Research Center, and we are the medical research department at the Cave Hill campus. We are also part of the Tropical Medicine Research Institute, which is a cross-Caribbean institute of the university, headquartered at Mona in Jamaica. Now, our research mandate is to study the chronic non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular disease like hypertension, stroke, cardiac disease, cancer, and diabetes as our key areas of inquiry. And the idea is to collect information with the idea that this information can be used to provide information for governments, ministries of health, locally and in the region, as well as to help to establish the evidence base for interventions and policy, as well as clinical practice locally and throughout the region.
Now, this all sounds very commonsensical. You need good data to make good decisions. But we have heard that the CDRC is the first of its kind in the region.
Well, what I would say is that we have grown out of the institute in Jamaica. So that's existed for at least 50 years. Tropical Medicine Research Unit was the initial forerunner, and it's done a lot of research in Mona looking at malnutrition. So a lot of what we know about treatment and diagnosis and management of malnutrition globally has come from work done in Jamaica, which has been cutting edge work which started back in the 1950s or thereabouts. There's also been a department in the same institute in Mona which looks at sickle cell disease, the sickle cell unit, and that actually established a sickle cell cohort of children born with sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait compared to a control born at a very similar time. And that allowed us to understand a lot about the clinical outcomes of sickle cell disease. Then there's the Epidemiology Research Unit at Mona, and that's our sister department. So it really began in Mona. We started our enterprise in Barbados independently, but we merged institutions back about 2000.
Okay. What I understood talking to your colleagues is that this institution, the CDRC, and the chronic disease registers that you have set up in Barbados, they are being looked at as models to replicate throughout the region.
Yes. No, this is actually very interesting. We know that the major cause of ill health in much of the Caribbean region are heart disease, which includes heart failure, heart attacks, and stroke, all underpinned by hypertension, as well as cancers. Now, it makes sense that one should be able to monitor the major cause of ill health and death in your communities, but this has not happened. And with funding from the European Union, which began in 2007, we established these national registries, which you know as the Barbados National Registry of Chronic Non-Communicable Diseases, or the BNR as we fondly call it, which allows us to carry out active surveillance of these diseases in the community on an island-wide basis. Now, this is actually a very powerful tool. Once one has had a heart attack or stroke, our data collection staff find those individuals, whether they're in the hospital or in the community. And because Barbados is such a small place, we can do it comprehensively for the whole country. And you're immediately registered. Then we ask people to participate in a follow-up, which takes place at 28 days and a year later, which allows us to see outcomes in terms of complications, survival, death. We found out that mortality rates are fairly high, which is rather disappointing, but allows us to try to determine why this is so we can put steps in place working with the relevant health authorities and ministries. And of course, then there's a cancer registry. That works a little bit differently. You collect data from people who've had cancer a couple of years after it's happened, because you go through a process of confirming the diagnosis, et cetera, and then people go through treatment processes, et cetera. And there's actually a functioning cancer registry here in Trinidad. We're working on the same sort of lines in terms of protocols and so forth.
I see. One of the things you've said is that when you came back from your studies abroad, research was not looked at as a viable career. Yeah. You have done a lot to change that, but could you tell us a little bit about your own research and the importance of research generally?
Yeah, I actually got involved in research while I was still a medical student. I was in my final year, and I had a unique opportunity to go off to Africa and do research in HIV. And this was in the mid-'80s, when HIV was a new and evolving illness in Africa. So I was bitten by the research bug during my travels in Uganda in the southwestern region of the Nile. When I returned to Barbados and I'd finished my undergrad exams, etc., and I started practicing medicine as a young doctor, I got very interested in some phenomena I observed in patients with diabetes, where they got focal seizures. In other words, it's a type of epilepsy which is confined to one or two limbs only, but they're quite conscious. So we published that in a very prestigious journal. Then I was able to pursue a fellowship to London University, funded by the Wellcome Trust. And that allowed me to train to a master's and a doctorate level. And I also did my clinical training. But as you said, when I got back to Barbados, there was an expectation that I can function in a research capacity. And in fact, Professor Henry Fraser, my mentor in this regard, had actually established the Chronic Disease Research Center a couple of years before. But then it was a matter of actualizing the vision and the dream. I was very, very fortunate yet again in that I joined a large project known as the Barbados Eye Studies, which is led by Stony Brook University out of New York. That had been running since about 1987. And it was actually the largest study of eye diseases in a predominantly black population. And they had recruited nearly over 4,700 Barbadians who were seen over a 12-year period, 3 examinations, looking at the development of glaucoma, cataract, and other eye diseases. And people were actually even offered treatment and so forth if they were discovered to have glaucoma. And this project showed that the highest burden, the highest occurrence of glaucoma in a population in the world was actually reported in Barbados in Barbadians over age 40. 7% of Barbadians over age 40 were discovered to have glaucoma. And it also established a lot of the underpinnings of our knowledge of factors leading to glaucoma and glaucoma risk. And later on, in the absence of similar studies in the United States of America, the Barbados Eye Studies data were used to determine the occurrence and risk factors in African Americans. This project was led by another one of my mentors, Professor Christina Lesky. And so I learned a lot. I was able to participate at a very high level, and I was able also to bring my particular interest in diabetes and hypertension to the project. And I started publishing in those areas in Barbados. And on the back of that, I was able to do many other projects, many other studies. But it allowed us to establish a research culture. And it grew from just 1 or 2 of us doing research to a department which has 6 positions now, people who are very high caliber researchers. And it has allowed us to attract other high caliber researchers into the university at Cave Hill campus. So it's been quite an amazing situation to see the development of research ethos. And not just that, there are many other people in Barbados who actually went to London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to train after I'd done my training there. So it's been quite an amazing situation to see the development of the research culture and training.
So that's what I want to talk about, the research culture, because as we were talking about, the notion that people spend time actually pursuing research does not seem to be a popular one in the region.
Yeah. I think in the region, if you are a doctor, you look after patients, you practice medicine. But in the developed countries, in North America, in Europe, there's a research track where you can actually be a qualified physician and you do research for a living. So it is a very credible research pathway, and we've been able to establish that type of pathway in our department in Barbados. That's been actually established before in Jamaica. So we brought that model to Barbados in a very successful way. And in fact, now we've actually had a very dynamic training program where we actually have over 6 doctoral students in our programs in the department.
And what they're studying epidemiology?
We have students who are doing immunology. Professor Clive Landis has been quite a significant proponent and has developed a lab from basically nothing since joined us in 2004. And he has a very successful enterprise. And we also have students doing epidemiology as well as public health through the department.
Okay. Now tell us a little bit about yourself. You come from a family of academic high achievers. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I come from a family, I have 5 brothers. And yes, we have been academically successful. And in fact, I did not recognize what I was exposed to as a child. We always had books, many, many books. And so reading and so forth is a natural part of how we function as a family. Of course, being boys, we played our violent games, our bows and arrows and cowboys and etc. But we would read, and we'd read a lot. And of the 6 brothers, in fact, 3 of us, including myself, won Barbados scholarships, and 2 won other scholarships, or we call them more scholarships, to university. And then again, I was very gratified that my son again recently won a Barbados scholarship himself, so he's going to the next generation. So yes, we have been successful academically. And I think that I really must acknowledge in that regard my parents, you know, in terms of how they shaped and guided the way that we proceeded and the way we recognize the importance of education. My mother's a teacher, and she really was the one who sat down with us after school to look at homework and to be very focused in terms of getting the work done and done well. So we're very grateful for the opportunities and the guidance that we had in terms of our academic leanings and so forth. Now, I think clearly one also wishes to use the opportunities you have to help others. And that's been very much part of how I've seen this part of my life. Trying to make a difference in terms of my research, to translate the research knowledge into practice and policy, to train others, train the next generation of researchers. That's very much part of our mandate, to extend our findings beyond just Barbados and regionally and globally. And I think it's a pretty big brief, but I think we must achieve these other things.
Okay. But I want to talk a little bit more about your origins. You told me that there was this one book you read which determined what you would do with your life. So tell me a little bit about the book, and tell me what the book is.
Yeah, it was actually quite an interesting thing. This book was one of the books that was in my father's study. It was Lucanus, Dear and Glorious Physician by Taylor Caldwell. And I probably picked up that book when I was about 13 or 14. I started reading the book, and I really couldn't put it down. It was a story about St. Luke, and it was about St. Luke's ministry in the early days of Christianity, and his divine gifts of healing, his capacity to heal, and his ability to heal the spiritual aspects, not just simply the physical aspects of people that he came into contact with. And the book was such a powerful book, I just couldn't put it down. I read it, and after I read that book, I just had to be a physician. And very interestingly, I've been trying to get that book for a number of years, and my son was studying abroad I recently located it, and he managed to get a couple of copies. And he said he took the book up and he read it straight for about 3-4 days. He couldn't put it down either. And I expect he's having a similar Saul on the road to Damascus moment in his life, having read the book himself. But we'll see. But yes, that book really was a significant part of my decision to become a doctor. And I also wanted to become a writer. So I'd wanted to become a doctor, scientist, a writer, all of those things. And I've been very, very blessed in that. I've been able to have a career which allows me to be all of those things in one.
And the church has been a very large part of your life.
Yes, again, another blessing.
That your father was a clergyman.
My father he's retired, but he still does conduct services. He's a retired Anglican clergyman. And yes, church has been an important part of my life. And I think really not because of my father's ministry. I probably was very rebellious because of that. I actually came to my own acceptance and realization of God's goodness and grace in my life through a series of other more complex situations, which take another day or two to go through and to explain. But nonetheless, I recognize very clearly that God was real, evil and sin were real, and that there was salvation, redemption through the promise through Christ's sacrifice for us. So a lot of things fell into place again in terms of my beliefs and my focus, which again has grounded me very much in terms of what my role and my purpose is here, in terms of what I'm trying to achieve, and trying to make a difference in a positive way.
Okay. Tell us what you would like to see in your field and out in the next 10 to 15 years in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I think my field is a very challenging area. We're looking at chronic non-communicable diseases, diseases of lifestyle, diseases underpinned by risk factors like our dietary habits, or activity patterns, whether or not we're sedentary or physically active, whether we drink too much, whether we smoke in a fundamental sort of way. And it requires that we change our behaviors. And that is so hard to do. But what I'd like to see happen is that our research allows us to make changes. There are some examples of that. The work we did in eye diseases has informed eye care and policy in African Americans. We've done work looking at pregnant gestational diabetes, as diabetes occurring during pregnancy for the first time, as part of a large consortium. And many of the findings have now underpinned the development of guidelines for diagnosing and manage diabetes during pregnancy. So I'm hoping that comes out into practice and policy very, very soon. We've done work in our department looking at risk factors for the diabetic foot and amputations. And again, we have learned, for example, that the highest mortality after diabetes-related amputations was reported in our research. And again, we are sort of hoping that this can lead to programs for preventing the complications of diabetes-related foot disease. Our work in the registries has showed us, for example, that healthcare systems need to be improved to reduce poor outcomes after heart attack and stroke and cancer. We've learned again that lupus rates in Barbados are the third highest in the world. And again, that speaks towards screening and aggressive treatment to prevent kidney disease. Because we find that about 50% of women 50% of women will get kidney disease within 3 years of diagnosis of lupus. And that is a sign of early death. So again, screening for kidney disease and lupus. So I've looked at a wide range of areas, but the idea is using information to change practice, translate it into policy to save lives. We have been able now to see that people with glaucoma will now be getting medications to reduce eye pressure if prescribed by an ophthalmologist in Barbados, which has been a very beneficial outcome of the large body of work we did looking at glaucoma in Barbadians. Because now that the drugs are benefit drugs, this will reduce the burden of blindness in Barbadians.
And we hope that this policy, this attitude to research will be spread throughout the region.
Yes, it is so important. I think governments must recognize it. The Caribbean governments have been very proactive in terms of leading the fight against chronic diseases. There was a Port of Spain declaration here in Trinidad about in 2007. And that then underpinned the Caribbean's leadership of the United Nations high-level meeting in 2011 against chronic diseases. So the Caribbean countries are well aware. Our late Prime Minister in Barbados said that unless we tackle the chronic diseases successfully, we'll wipe out all the gains that we have made in the Caribbean since independence. It's a major problem. But you could only then do it if you have ways of monitoring the situation in each of our countries, ways to see that you're spending health dollars in the best possible way, ways to prevent chronic diseases. And I think governments in the Caribbean must be cognizant of this fact, and they must invest in health and in health research.
Okay.
It really is a no-brainer.
Do you have any a final pithy closing statement that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I think I will acknowledge again the award by the SABGA, by Dr. Anthony Sabga. And it really has been a tremendous and humbling experience for me, because one works very hard, one loves what one does, and one doesn't do it in the expectation of being acknowledged. But it really is very inspiring to be acknowledged in this way, and I'm very grateful to the foundation for doing such. And I think I'd like to use this opportunity again to even be more resolute in my determination to make that difference in the work that we're doing.